Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the deep, often disturbing currents of ancient Chinese history, the kind of history that makes you grateful for modern plumbing and, well, not being born into an emperor's family. Imagine stepping back in time, way back, to a period where the very foundations of a vast civilization were being laid. You're not just reading about it, you're there, feeling the dust on your skin, hearing the whispers of ambition and fear. It's a world teeming with innovation, philosophy, and incredible power, but also one where the flick of an imperial wrist could end 1,000 lives, and where bad day often meant tortured to death. Honestly, you probably wouldn't last 5 minutes. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me, where are you listening from tonight? And what time is it there now? Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing on the banks of the Yellow River, the muddy, life-giving artery of ancient China. The air is thick with the scent of damp earth and distant wood smoke. It's an era so far removed from your own that it feels almost mythical. A time when the very concept of an empire was taking root. This is where you begin your involuntary journey, right at the legendary dawn, with the Yellow Emperor, Huangdi. Now, if you're picturing a benevolent, wise old man gently guiding his people, you're only seeing half the picture. The legends paint him as a cultural hero, credited with inventing everything from writing to medicine, even the compass. You hear the stories whispered around crackling fires, tales of his mastery over elements, his defeat of monstrous beasts, and his unification of various tribes. It all sounds rather idyllic, doesn't it? Almost too perfect. But as you observe, a subtle unease begins to creep in. You notice the sheer scale of the obedience, the absolute deference given to this mythical figure. While he's lauded for bringing order, you can't help but wonder about the cost of that order. Did everyone willingly fall in line with his grand vision? Or was there a more forceful hand at play? Hidden beneath the shimmering veneer of legend, the early sagas, often romanticized, hint at fierce battles, not just against mythical creatures, but against rival chieftains who dared to challenge his authority. You see the nascent forms of bureaucracy, the division of labor, and the establishment of rituals that would shape Chinese society for millennia. It's fascinating, almost hypnotic, to watch an entire civilization being forged from what seems like primordial chaos. The Yellow Emperor's reign, whether purely historical or largely mythical, marks a pivotal shift. Before him, you envision a landscape of scattered, independent tribes, each living by their own rules. With his emergence, or rather, the consolidation of power attributed to him, comes the idea of a centralized authority, a singular figure whose will becomes law for vast swaths of land. You can almost feel the collective breath being held as people adapt to this new paradigm. It's a fundamental shift in how power is exercised and perceived. You learn about his legendary battle against Qiyu, a warlord with a fearsome reputation, said to have wielded bronze weapons and controlled mist. Imagine standing on a muddy battlefield, the air thick with the metallic tang of blood and the cries of thousands, as two godlike figures clash. It's not the serene image of invention and philosophy you might have initially conjured. This era, though shrouded in the mists of time, lays the groundwork for later imperial ambitions. You see the seeds of the mandate of heaven, the concept that the ruler's authority comes directly from a divine power, justifying their absolute rule. If the Yellow Emperor truly was a divine figure, then challenging his successors would be tantamount to challenging the heavens themselves. It's a brilliant piece of political engineering, ensuring compliance through both fear and spiritual conviction. You might even catch a glimpse of the early forms of human sacrifice, a chilling reminder that the pursuit of order often came with a heavy price. While the legends speak of agricultural advancements and silk production, they also subtly hint at the kind of brute force required to bring disparate groups under one banner. It's a testament to how power, even in its most nascent forms, could be both incredibly creative and terrifyingly destructive. As the generations pass, the legends of the Yellow Emperor solidify into foundational myths, shaping the identity of the nascent Chinese people. You observe how these stories are passed down, embellished, and used to reinforce the authority of subsequent rulers. The notion that you are a descendant of this great, almost divine figure provides a powerful sense of lineage and destiny. But even as the narrative of the glorious founder takes hold, you can't shake the feeling that something darker lurked beneath the surface. For every tale of wisdom, there's an unspoken implication of coercion. For every invention credited to him, there's the unwritten story of the countless laborers who toiled under his command. The earliest records, fragmentary as they are, suggest a society that was far from a utopian idyll. You might hear whispers of forced labor, of strict hierarchies, and of punishments designed to instill absolute obedience. This isn't the cuddly history you read in children's books. It's the gritty, often brutal reality of early state formation. Historians still debate whether the Yellow Emperor was a single historical figure or a composite of several early tribal leaders. But regardless, the impact of his mythical reign on subsequent Chinese governance is undeniable. You start to understand that even in the foundational myths, the seeds of future imperial tyranny were already being sown. The absolute power attributed to these early legendary rulers set a precedent for the emperors who would follow. A precedent that often led to unimaginable cruelty and oppression. It's a subtle but pervasive truth that underpins much of China's imperial history, the concept of an all-powerful ruler, answerable to none but the heavens, was established right at the very beginning. You continue to drift through the nascent stages of Chinese civilization, observing the development of early agricultural techniques, the rise of fortified settlements, and the emergence of distinct social classes. The idea of a king, a supreme leader, is taking firm root, and with it, the potential for both great achievements and great abuses. You see the earliest forms of ancestor worship, a practice that would later become a cornerstone of Chinese culture, but also one that could be manipulated to legitimize dynastic rule. The ancestors, particularly the imperial ancestors, were seen as mediators between the living and the divine, lending immense spiritual authority to the reigning monarch. The landscape is still wild, vast, and untamed, but you see the relentless human effort to impose order upon it. You witness the construction of rudimentary irrigation systems, the clearing of land for crops, and the beginnings of complex social structures. It's a period of immense change, driven by the need for survival and the desire for control. The early kings or chiefs aren't just spiritual leaders, they are military commanders, economic planners, and the ultimate arbiters of justice. Their power is absolute, and while their reigns might be glorified in later retellings, you can sense the raw, unbridled authority that they wielded. It's a harsh world, where life is cheap, and dissent is met with swift, brutal reprisal. You might even see the crude, early forms of divination, where bones are heated until they crack, and the patterns are interpreted as messages from the ancestors or the divine. This practice, later refined, becomes another tool in the hands of the ruling elite, allowing them to claim divine sanction for their decisions. No matter how self-serving, it's all part of the intricate tapestry of power and control being woven in these early centuries. The common people, you observe, are largely voiceless, their lives dictated by the whims of those above them. This is the enduring, often terrifying, pattern you will see repeated throughout Chinese history: immense power concentrated in the hands of a few with very little accountability. The atmosphere shifts slightly as you move further into the shadowy early dynasties, where the line between myth and history becomes even blurrier. You might hear whispers of rulers who indulged in excessive cruelty, or who squandered their people's resources on lavish personal projects. These are the cautionary tales, the dark reflections in the historical mirror, warning against unchecked power. Even in these foundational periods, the seeds of imperial decay are already present, showing that the potential for corruption and tyranny exists from the very beginning. You can almost feel the burden of history, the weight of countless lives lived and lost under the shadow of absolute rule. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen from ancient Egypt? It's a different continent, but the theme of historical weirdness and discomfort remains strong. The sheer audacity of some of these early rulers, believing themselves to be divinely appointed and therefore beyond reproach, sets a precedent that will haunt China for millennia. As you conclude your observation of this foundational era, you're left with a profound sense of the dual nature of power. On one hand, it's the engine of civilization, enabling grand projects and fostering societal advancements. On the other, it's a dangerous current, prone to sweeping away individual liberties and perpetrating unspeakable acts in the name of order or personal glory. The Yellow Emperor, whether real or symbolic, embodies this paradox, laying the groundwork for both the triumphs and the horrors that would define imperial China. You realize that the foundations of a powerful empire are often built on a bed of both ingenuity and ruthless ambition, a chilling combination that will echo through the centuries. You've just witnessed the murky origins of Chinese civilization, where legendary figures like the Yellow Emperor laid down the very concept of absolute rule. Now, fast forward through centuries of fragmented states and warring factions. The air around you feels charged, almost electric, with an energy that promises both immense power and terrible destruction. You're standing on the precipice of a new era, one that will redefine China forever, the ruthless unification under Qin Shi Huang. Imagine the sheer audacity of this man. For centuries, China had been a patchwork quilt of independent states, each with its own customs, armies, and ambitions, locked in what historians later called the Warring States period. It was a brutal, relentless struggle for dominance, a time when life was cheap and alliances were forged only to be broken. You've seen the chaos, the endless battles, the desperate scramble for survival. But then, one state, Qin, began to assert its dominance with an almost terrifying efficiency. You see the Qin state not just fighting, but innovating. They developed highly disciplined armies, employed sophisticated military strategies, and perhaps most chillingly, embraced a philosophy known as legalism. This isn't about gentle persuasion or moral guidance. Legalism is about strict laws, absolute authority, and harsh punishments. It's a philosophy that believes human beings are inherently selfish and must be controlled through fear. You feel the chill of it in the air, a rigid, unyielding ideology that values order above all else, even human life. As you observe the rise of Qin Shi Huang, you notice his relentless drive, his unyielding ambition. He's not interested in compromise or negotiation. His vision is total unification, a single empire under his unquestionable rule. You witness his armies, an unstoppable force, sweeping across the land, crushing resistance with brutal efficiency. The cries of defeated armies, the burning of conquered cities, these are the sounds and sights that define this period. It's a relentless, bloody march towards absolute power. One of the most striking things you'll see is the sheer scale of the mobilization. Qin Shi Huang didn't just conquer, he demanded. He conscripted vast numbers of men for his endless campaigns, uprooting lives and tearing families apart. You might see villagers, tears in their eyes, forced to leave their homes and join the imperial legions, or to labor on colossal state projects. This wasn't voluntary service. It was absolute command. The needs of the state, and more accurately, the needs of the emperor, superseded everything. And what projects they were: the Great Wall, not the continuous stone serpent you might picture today, but an earlier, monumental undertaking that connected and extended existing defensive barriers. You see thousands upon thousands of laborers, many of them convicts, scholars, or peasants, toiling in unimaginable conditions. The dust chokes you, the sun beats down relentlessly, and the overseers are merciless. You witness the sheer human cost of this monumental feat, bodies collapsing from exhaustion, sickness, or injury, their lives extinguished with barely a glance. Historians still debate the exact number of deaths during the construction of the Great Wall, but estimates run into the hundreds of thousands, painting a grim picture of imperial ambition built on human suffering. It's a chilling testament to the ruthlessness of the regime. Then there's the Terracotta Army, another astonishing feat of engineering and artistry, but one born from a chilling obsession. Qin Shi Huang, fearing death, sought immortality. He believed that this vast underground army of clay soldiers, chariots, and horses would protect him in the afterlife. You walk among the silent ranks, thousands of unique faces staring blankly ahead. It's an awe-inspiring sight, but also a deeply disturbing one when you consider the millions of hours of forced labor, the immense resources diverted, and the untold suffering of those who built this elaborate tomb complex. Remember how you felt about the Yellow Emperor's subtle coercion. This is coercion on a truly terrifying scale, an empire-wide project driven by one man's megalomania. Beyond the grand projects, you observe the systematic dismantling of the old order. Qin Shi Huang abolished the feudal system, replacing it with a centralized bureaucracy. He standardized everything: weights, measures, currency, even the width of cart axles, ensuring that every wagon wheel would fit into the standardized ruts of his newly built roads. It sounds efficient, almost modern, but it was also a way to exert absolute control over every facet of life. You see the sheer determination to erase regional differences and forge a single, unified identity, an identity dictated solely by the Qin state. Perhaps most notoriously, you witness the burning of the books and burying of the scholars. This wasn't just censorship. It was an attempt to control thought itself. Qin Shi Huang feared that classical texts, particularly those espousing Confucian ideals of benevolence and filial piety, would undermine his absolute authority. So, he ordered the destruction of vast libraries of ancient texts, preserving only those deemed useful for practical purposes, like agriculture or medicine. And the scholars who dared to resist, you might hear the chilling tales, or even glimpse the grim reality, of those buried alive. A stark warning against intellectual dissent. It's a horrifying spectacle. A government deliberately trying to eradicate knowledge and independent thought. It's a reminder that unchecked power often leads to the suppression of truth and intellectual freedom. The emperor's paranoia was legendary. You see him living in constant fear of assassination, moving between palaces. His movements kept secret. His search for an elixir of immortality led him to consume mercury and other toxic substances, likely contributing to his increasingly erratic behavior and eventual demise. It's an ironic twist: the man who so desperately tried to escape death hastened it with his own desperate measures. You might even catch a glimpse of his infamous traveling palace, a network of interconnected rooms and passages designed to confuse potential assassins. It's a stark illustration of the psychological toll of absolute power. The very air seems to hum with his presence. Even when he's unseen, you feel the weight of his decrees, the constant pressure to conform, to obey. The legal system under Qin was incredibly harsh. Minor infractions could lead to severe penalties, and collective punishment was common. If one person in a family or village committed a crime, the whole group could suffer. You see people living in a state of constant fear, terrified of attracting the attention of the state. It's a system designed to crush any hint of rebellion, any whisper of dissent. The legacy of Qin Shi Huang is undeniably complex. On one hand, he unified China, laid the foundations for a centralized imperial system that would last for 2 millennia, and initiated grand projects that shaped the physical landscape. On the other, he was a tyrannical despot, responsible for immense human suffering, the suppression of thought, and a reign built on fear and brutality. You consider the long-term impact of his rule, the template he set for future emperors, his absolute authority, his legalistic approach, and his willingness to use extreme force became a blueprint, for better or worse, for many who followed. As you stand amidst the ghost of his empire, You sense the fragility of even the most powerful dynasties. Despite his incredible might, Qin Shi Huang's reign was incredibly short-lived, collapsing just a few years after his death due to widespread rebellion. The very ruthlessness that enabled his unification also sowed the seeds of his downfall. The common people, pushed to their breaking point by relentless labor, draconian laws, and heavy taxes, eventually rose up. It's a powerful reminder that even absolute power has its limits, and that the human spirit, when pushed too far, will always seek freedom. You reflect on the terrifying efficiency of the Qin state, and the chilling realization that such comprehensive control, while creating order, often comes at the unimaginable cost of human dignity and freedom. The whispers of the Yellow Emperor's coercive power have now exploded into the full-blown tyranny of a true empire, setting a dark precedent for centuries to come. The experience of living under Qin Shi Huang's rule would have been one of constant dread, a suffocating weight of state control that permeated every aspect of existence. You've just emerged from the suffocating grip of the Qin dynasty, a brief but brutal reign that unified China through sheer force and unyielding legalism. The echoes of falling walls and burning books still linger in your ears, but as swiftly as the Qin rose, it fell, crumbling under the weight of its own tyranny. Now, you find yourself drifting into an era that promised a different kind of order, one often hailed as a golden age, the Han dynasty. Yet, as you'll soon discover, even golden ages can conceal shadows. The Han, lasting for over 4 centuries, is often compared to the Roman Empire in its longevity and influence. You arrive as the dust settles from the rebellions that toppled the Qin. The new rulers, initially, learned lessons from their predecessors' mistakes. They eased the draconian laws, reduced forced labor, and adopted a more nuanced approach to governance, incorporating elements of Confucianism alongside the practicalities of legalism. This shift is palpable. The air feels less oppressive, more breathable. You see scholars emerging from hiding, their knowledge once again valued, even revered. It feels like a genuine sigh of relief after the Qin's brutal efficiency. You observe the flourishing of culture, the expansion of trade along the Silk Road, and incredible advancements in science and technology. Paper is invented, revolutionizing communication. The compass begins its journey from a tool for divination to one for navigation. Astronomy thrives, and medical knowledge expands. You might see bustling markets overflowing with exotic goods from distant lands, hear the chatter of merchants, and feel the vibrant energy of a society seemingly at peace and prospering. It's truly a magnificent spectacle of human achievement, a testament to what a stable empire can accomplish. But as you settle into this seemingly benevolent era, the cracks begin to show, particularly within the imperial court itself. The Han dynasty, for all its enlightened facade, was plagued by a persistent and insidious darkness, the power of the eunuchs. These men, castrated to ensure they posed no threat to the imperial bloodline or the empresses, often rose to positions of immense influence within the palace. You see them, often outwardly deferential, yet subtly manipulating the young or weak emperors, forming factions, and engaging in ruthless power struggles. Their proximity to the emperor made them indispensable, but also incredibly dangerous. Imagine being an emperor, often secluded within the vast palace, reliant on these eunuchs for information, advice, and even daily necessities. You witness their whispers, their subtle machinations, as they consolidate power, appoint their cronies to key positions, and amass enormous personal fortunes. They control access to the emperor, filtering information and ensuring that only their preferred narratives reach the imperial ear. The grand pronouncements of the Han court, the impressive ceremonies beneath them. A venomous current of intrigue runs deep. Historians still debate the extent to which eunuchs held true political power versus merely serving as instruments for various factions. But their undeniable influence often led to corruption and instability. Then there are the imperial consorts and their families. While the emperor was the ultimate authority, his numerous wives and concubines often brought their ambitious families into the palace. These relatives, eager for power and prestige, would form alliances with powerful eunuchs, or even other consort families, creating a tangled web of rivalries. You might see a young emperor, barely out of his teens, caught in the crossfire of his mother's family, his grandmother's faction, and the ever-present eunuchs. It's a cutthroat Game of Thrones, played out within the gilded cages of the imperial palace. Consider the implications: an entire empire, with millions of people, ultimately being steered by the petty rivalries and insatiable greed of a handful of individuals cloistered within the Forbidden City. You see decrees issued, policies implemented, and wars launched, all of which could be the result of a eunuch's vendetta or a consort's desire for her brother to gain a higher office. It's a shocking realization that beneath the veneer of orderly governance, a viper's nest of backstabbing and manipulation thrives. One particularly disturbing fact about the Han is the pervasive use of slavery, even in what was considered a more enlightened era. While not as widespread or brutal as in some other ancient empires, slavery was a recognized institution. You might see families selling their children into bondage during times of famine, or individuals being enslaved as punishment for crimes. These slaves, though sometimes treated relatively well in wealthy households, were still property, subject to the whims of their owners. It's a stark contrast to the philosophical ideals of universal benevolence that Confucianism purported to promote. The reality on the ground was often far harsher than the lofty pronouncements from the Imperial Academy. You also observe the subtle but brutal forms of control. While the Qin's punishments were overt and grand, the Han often employed more insidious methods. The system of mutual responsibility could lead to entire families or even villages being punished for the actions of one individual. It instilled a pervasive fear and fostered an environment of suspicion, where trust was a luxury few could afford. You can almost feel the weight of this invisible network of control, where everyone is potentially watching everyone else. And what about the fate of those who fell out of favor? While not always the public spectacle of Qin Shi Huang's mass executions, the Han court was still a dangerous place. Generals who failed might be forced to commit suicide. Officials who spoke out of turn could find themselves exiled to remote, desolate regions, never to be heard from again. And for those deemed a genuine threat to the imperial family or the eunuch factions, more direct and gruesome fates awaited. You might hear whispers of poisoned food, arranged accidents, or secret imprisonment followed by a slow, agonizing death. The refined facade of the Han court often concealed a truly vicious underbelly. Even the much-lauded Silk Road had its dark side. While it brought unprecedented wealth and cultural exchange, it also facilitated the spread of diseases and, for those who traveled it, immense hardship and danger. Bandits, harsh climates, and unforgiving landscapes claimed countless lives. You might imagine a caravan making its way across treacherous deserts, fully aware that a single sandstorm or a raid by nomadic tribes could mean certain death. It wasn't just a romantic pathway for goods. It was a perilous lifeline that demanded constant sacrifice. The decline of the Han, much like its rise, was interwoven with these internal power struggles. The eunuchs and consort families grew increasingly powerful, leading to widespread corruption and a weakening of central authority. You see the resentment brewing among the common people, burdened by heavy taxes and neglected by an increasingly detached imperial court. Rebellions, like the Yellow Turban Rebellion, eventually erupted, driven by desperation and a thirst for justice. These were not mere skirmishes. They were massive uprisings that tore the empire apart, leading to widespread death and destruction. The Han dynasty, despite its undeniable achievements and its enduring legacy, serves as a powerful reminder that stability and prosperity can often mask profound internal rot. The intricate dance of power within the imperial palace, the pervasive influence of eunuchs, and the quiet brutality of a seemingly benevolent system highlight the enduring darkness that can lurk beneath even the most celebrated eras of history. You've witnessed the full spectrum from the mythical authority of the Yellow Emperor, through the iron fist of Qin Shi Huang, and now, the deceptive calm of the Han. where political intrigue and subtle cruelty could be just as deadly as overt tyranny. You've navigated the deceptive calm of the Han dynasty, where imperial power, though seemingly benevolent, was often undermined by the sinister machinations of eunuchs and ambitious consort families. The long reign of the Han ultimately buckled under its own internal strife, giving way to a period of unprecedented chaos and fragmentation. Now, you're plunged into the tumultuous and bloody era known as the Three Kingdoms. Imagine the colossal Han Empire, once a unified entity, shattering into pieces like a dropped ceramic vase. You find yourself amidst the ruins, where three powerful warlords rise from the ashes, each vying for ultimate control, each believing they hold the mandate of heaven. This isn't just a political struggle, it's a period of relentless warfare, cunning stratagems, and profound human tragedy that would captivate Chinese imagination for centuries. The year is roughly 220 CE, and the Han dynasty has officially collapsed. The land is scarred by famine, rebellion, and endless conflict. You see the emergence of three dominant figures kowtow in the north, a brilliant but ruthless strategist, Liu Bei in the southwest, who champions himself as a true descendant of the Han imperial line and embodies Confucian virtues, or at least tries to, and Sun Quan in the southeast, ruling over the fertile lands of the Yangtze River. These are not just leaders, they are legends in the making. Their stories romanticized and retold in countless tales, most famously in the epic novel, Romance of the Three Kingdoms. You witness the sheer scale of the battles. These aren't small skirmishes, they are massive engagements involving hundreds of thousands of soldiers, fought across vast landscapes. The Battle of Red Cliffs is a prime example, a naval confrontation so pivotal it altered the course of history. You can almost feel the spray of the water, the heat of the burning ships, and the desperate cries of men as Cao Cao's massive northern fleet is decimated by the cunning alliance of Liu Bei and Sun Quan. It's a moment of breathtaking strategic brilliance, where a numerically inferior force achieves a decisive victory, but beneath the glory, you're reminded of the immense human cost, the countless lives extinguished in the pursuit of power. The constant state of war profoundly impacted the common people. You see entire populations displaced, fleeing before advancing armies, their homes burned, their lands laid waste. Famine is a constant companion. As agricultural production collapses under the weight of perpetual conflict, life becomes cheap, and survival a daily struggle. You might observe starving peasants reduced to banditry, or even worse, resorting to cannibalism in their desperation, a grim reality often glossed over in the heroic narratives. The romanticized tales of brave warriors and clever strategists often forget the unimaginable suffering of the ordinary citizens caught in the crossfire. One of the most defining characteristics of this era is the omnipresent treachery and shifting loyalties. Alliances are made and broken with startling speed. A general might pledge fealty to one warlord one day, only to defect to a rival the next, driven by ambition, fear, or perceived slights. You see brothers in arms turning on each other, loyal advisors betraying their lords, and elaborate plots unfolding within the inner circles of each kingdom. It's a game of endless deception, where trust is a dangerous luxury. Historians still debate whether the moral compromises made by leaders like Liu Bei undermined their stated Confucian ideals, but the brutal realities of war often left little room for ethical purity. Consider the famous strategist Zhuge Liang, serving Liu Bei. He's often depicted as a near-magical figure, capable of predicting the future and manipulating the elements. You witness his ingenious stratagems, like the empty fort strategy where he bluffs an enemy into retreating by pretending a defenseless fort is an ambush. These moments are thrilling to observe, a testament to the power of intellect in warfare. But even his brilliance couldn't entirely stem the tide of relentless conflict. Nor could it erase the harsh truth that his genius was ultimately directed towards the systematic destruction of human lives in pursuit of victory. The sheer scale of the human toll during the Three Kingdoms period is staggering. Estimates suggest that China's population may have dropped by as much as 75% from the peak of the Han Dynasty. Imagine the desolation, the ghost cities, the vast stretches of uncultivated land where millions once lived. This wasn't just a political reshuffling. It was a demographic catastrophe, a dark testament to the destructive potential of prolonged civil war. You are walking through a land that has been bled dry. You also observe the subtle psychological toll on the leaders themselves. Cao Cao, for example, for all his strategic genius, becomes increasingly paranoid as he ages, suspecting plots everywhere and executing anyone he perceives as a threat, even trusted advisors. You see the burden of power, the constant need to anticipate betrayal, and the isolation that comes with absolute authority in a volatile world. It's a world where even the most powerful men are constantly looking over their shoulders. The Three Kingdoms period, though romanticized, also showcases the darker aspects of power, the willingness to sacrifice countless lives for territorial gain, the glorification of warfare, and the normalization of brutal tactics. You might hear stories of massacres committed by conquering armies, or the systematic destruction of farmlands to starve out enemy populations. These are not just anecdotes, they are grim realities that define the lives of millions. Remember the early emperors who used forced labor for monuments. Here, the monument is a unified empire, and the labor is the endless sacrifice of human life. Despite the bloodshed, you also see moments of surprising cultural development. Literature and poetry flourish, often reflecting the turbulent times and the heroism or folly of the figures involved. Calligraphy becomes an art form. Taoist philosophical traditions gain prominence, offering solace and an alternative worldview to the pervasive conflict. It's a strange juxtaposition, moments of refined artistry emerging from a backdrop of relentless violence. It suggests a resilient spirit, a human need to create beauty even in the darkest of times. As the decades grind on, the initial fervor of the three rival states slowly wanes. The constant warfare takes its toll on resources and manpower. Eventually, one of the three, the state of Wei founded by Cao Cao's son, is usurped by a powerful family, the Sima clan, who established the Jin dynasty, briefly reuniting China. But even this reunification is fragile, destined to shatter again into further periods of disunity. The Three Kingdoms era is less a stable period and more a violent intermission between long stretches of unified imperial rule. You are left with the lasting impression of a period defined by epic battles, legendary figures, and a pervasive sense of tragedy. The Three Kingdoms truly exemplifies how political ambition, unchecked by a strong central authority, can plunge an entire civilization into prolonged, devastating conflict. It's a period that continues to fascinate, but also one that serves as a stark warning about the human cost of unbridled power struggles. The stories are thrilling, but the reality was terrifying. You've just witnessed the brutal, fragmented landscape of the Three Kingdoms, a period of unrelenting warfare and shifting loyalties that left China bleeding. The brief reunification under the Jin dynasty proved fleeting, and soon, the empire shattered once more into numerous warring states, enduring centuries of disunity. Now, you emerge from that prolonged darkness, as a new power rises, one promising to once again unite the land through colossal ambition, the Sui dynasty. Imagine the collective sigh of relief as China, after nearly 4 centuries of division, finally finds a semblance of unity. The Sui dynasty, founded by Emperor Wen in 581 CE, brought an end to the period of northern and southern dynasties, much like the Qin did after the warring states. You feel a sense of renewed hope, a yearning for stability after generations of chaos. Emperor Wen, initially, was a capable ruler, streamlining the administration and improving infrastructure, but it's his successor, Emperor Yang, who truly captures your attention, for his reign would be a magnificent, yet ultimately disastrous, display of grand folly. Emperor Yang of Sui was a man of immense vision, but also staggering hubris and extravagance. He dreamed of an empire even grander than the Han, one that would cement his legacy in the annals of history. You witness his most ambitious and ultimately ruinous, undertaking the construction of the Grand Canal. This wasn't just a simple ditch, it was a monumental feat of engineering. connecting the Yellow River in the north with the Yangtze River in the south, effectively linking the two great economic and cultural centers of China. You see hundreds of thousands, perhaps even millions, of laborers conscripted for this colossal project. Peasants, soldiers, convicts, all were forced to toil in unimaginable conditions. The air is thick with dust, sweat, and the constant thud of pickaxes. You hear the cries of the overseers, the groans of men straining against heavy loads, and the splash of countless bodies falling into the muddy waters. The scale is breathtaking, truly a testament to human ingenuity and perseverance. Yet, the human cost is equally breathtaking. Untold numbers died from exhaustion, disease, and starvation. Remember the forced labor for the Great Wall under Qin Shi Huang? This is on a comparable scale, but with an added layer of imperial indulgence. Emperor Yang was not merely building a canal for practical purposes. He was building it for himself. You observe him embarking on lavish tours along the newly constructed waterways, sailing on magnificent dragon boats, accompanied by an immense retinue. These pleasure cruises, often stretching for hundreds of miles, further drained the imperial coffers and exacerbated the suffering of the common people, who were forced to provide provisions and labor for these extravagant expeditions. It's a chilling display of imperial detachment from the grim reality faced by his subjects. Beyond the Grand Canal, Emperor Yang's ambition extended to grand palace constructions. You see new palaces rising in the capitals, designed with unimaginable opulence, built to satisfy his insatiable desire for luxury and splendor. These projects, coupled with the canal, placed an unbearable strain on the imperial treasury and, more importantly, on the populace who had to fund and build them. The wealth of the empire was being poured into projects that, while impressive, offered little immediate relief or benefit to the struggling commoners. But Emperor Yang's folly wasn't limited to domestic projects. His foreign policy was equally disastrous. He embarked on a series of ruinous military campaigns, most notably against the Korean kingdom of Goguryeo. You witnessed the immense armies assembled, the vast quantities of supplies gathered, and the sheer logistical nightmare of moving hundreds of thousands of men across difficult terrain. Time and again, these campaigns ended in catastrophic failure. The forces were decimated by disease, starvation, and the fierce resistance of the Goguryeo armies. The toll of these wars on China was immense. You see the devastated farmlands, the empty villages, and the rising tide of discontent. Families were torn apart as men were conscripted, never to return. The constant demands for taxes and labor pushed the populace to their breaking point. Remember the Three Kingdoms and the immense population decline, the Sui, though starting from a lower base, repeated the pattern of squandering human lives on imperial vanity projects and ill-conceived wars. The emperor's detached and self-indulgent lifestyle only fueled the growing resentment. He seemed oblivious to the suffering of his people, increasingly isolated within his opulent palaces, surrounded by sycophantic courtiers. You might catch glimpses of his lavish banquets, his endless pursuit of beautiful women, and his disregard for political realities. It's a classic tale of a ruler whose hubris leads to his ultimate downfall. The final straw for the Sui dynasty was the widespread rebellions that erupted across the empire, driven by famine, crushing taxes, and the seemingly endless conscription for the disastrous Korean campaigns and grand construction projects. The common people finally rose up in desperation. You see the raw fury of the peasant uprisings, the coordinated attacks on local officials, and the swift spread of chaos. The very unity that the Sui had achieved through force began to unravel. Piece by bloody piece, the military, stretched thin and exhausted by the Korean campaigns, was unable to quell the numerous revolts. Generals, seeing the writing on the wall, began to defect or declare their own independent kingdoms. Emperor Yang, once the epitome of imperial power, found himself increasingly isolated and powerless. Historians still debate whether Emperor Yang was truly a visionary or simply a reckless megalomaniac, but the consequences of his actions are undeniable: the rapid collapse of his dynasty. You witness the dramatic end of the Sui, Emperor Yang, surrounded by disloyal generals and facing a collapsing empire, is finally assassinated by one of his own disgruntled generals in 618 CE. The empire, built on such grand but ultimately unsustainable ambitions, crumbles into a period of renewed civil war. The cycle of unity and disunity, driven by the whims and ambitions of powerful rulers, continues its relentless turn. The Sui dynasty, though short-lived, left an indelible mark on Chinese history. The Grand Canal, despite the immense human cost of its construction, would become a vital artery for future dynasties, facilitating trade and communication for centuries to come. It's a bitter irony that Emperor Yang's most destructive project would become his most enduring legacy. However, his reign also serves as a potent cautionary tale that even the most ambitious visions, when pursued with utter disregard for human suffering and economic reality, are doomed to fail. You've seen how quickly an empire can rise and fall when its foundations are built on the backs of an exhausted and desperate populace. The ghost of Sui stands as a stark reminder of the ultimate cost of grand folly. You've just witnessed the spectacular, yet short-lived, rise and fall of the Sui dynasty, an era defined by grandiose projects and imperial hubris that pushed China to its breaking point. The Grand Canal stands as a testament to their ambition, but also to the unspeakable human cost. Now, as the dust of the Sui's collapse settles, a new dynasty emerges from the chaos, promising a return to glory and stability. Welcome to the Tang dynasty, an era often hailed as China's Golden Age, a period of unparalleled cultural brilliance and imperial power. Yet, as with all golden ages in history, a deeper look reveals some profoundly disturbing facts lurking beneath the glittering surface. You arrive in the early 7th century, feeling the vibrant energy of a reborn empire. The Tang, founded by Emperor Gaozu and solidified by his brilliant son, Emperor Taizong, learned from the mistakes of the Sui. They recognized the need for a stable economy, a competent bureaucracy, and a more benevolent approach to governance. At least initially. You see the implementation of a refined civil service examination system, theoretically allowing men of talent, not just birth, to rise in government. This seems like a genuine step towards meritocracy, and for a while, it brings a refreshing sense of hope and dynamism. The Tang capital, Chang'an modern-day Xi'an, is the largest and most cosmopolitan city in the world at this time. Imagine yourself walking through its bustling streets. Merchants from Persia, Arabia, and India haggle over silk and spices. Buddhist monks from Central Asia stroll alongside scholars and poets. The air is filled with the scent of exotic incense, the sounds of foreign languages, and the visual feast of diverse cultures mingling freely. It's a truly magnificent sight, a vibrant melting pot that speaks to the empire's open-mindedness and global reach. This is the zenith of Chinese culture, where poetry, painting, music, and dance flourish as never before. You see calligraphy masters at work, poets composing verses that will echo through the ages, and dazzling theatrical performances. It's a feast for the senses, a world of refinement and unparalleled artistic expression. But even in this golden age, the familiar shadows of imperial power begin to lengthen. One of the most fascinating and disturbing figures you encounter is Empress Wu Zetian, rising from a low-ranking concubine to the only female emperor in Chinese history. Her story is one of incredible ambition, shrewd political maneuvering, and ruthless elimination of rivals. You witness her systematic ascent, patiently outmaneuvering and outliving her competitors, including her own children and numerous members of the imperial family. She was a master of political intrigue, utilizing spies, informants, and even manipulating public opinion to solidify her power. Her reign, though often lauded for its administrative competence and the promotion of Buddhism, was also marked by pervasive paranoia and brutal purges. You might hear whispers of rivals disappearing, of accusations of witchcraft leading to swift and merciless executions, and of a vast network of secret police enforcing her will. Her methods were undeniably effective in consolidating her power, but they left a trail of fear and bloodshed. Historians still debate whether Empress Wu's brutality was a necessary evil for a woman to assert authority in a patriarchal society, or simply a manifestation of her own ruthless ambition. But the fact remains that her path to the throne was paved with countless victims. Remember, the eunuchs of the Han Empress Wu was a different kind of power broker, but equally, if not more, formidable. Beyond the imperial court, you also encounter the reality of Tang expansion. The empire stretched its influence far and wide, through both diplomacy and military might. While this brought unprecedented wealth and cultural exchange, it also meant continuous warfare on the frontiers. You see the hardened Tang armies, renowned for their cavalry and their use of siege engines, engaged in brutal campaigns against nomadic tribes and rival kingdoms. These wars, while often successful, came at a significant cost in human lives and resources, leading to the conscription of vast numbers of men from across the empire. Another uncomfortable truth of the Tang era, often romanticized for its cosmopolitanism, was the presence of a thriving slave trade. While not the central pillar of the economy as in some other empires, slavery was widespread. You might see foreign captives from conquered lands, or Chinese commoners forced into bondage due to debt or famine, being bought and sold in the bustling markets of Chang'an. Wealthy households often employed large numbers of domestic slaves, and skilled artisans could also be enslaved. It's a jarring contrast to the sophisticated and refined image of Tang society, a reminder that even in its peak, elements of human exploitation persisted. The empire's vastness also meant that abuses of power could occur far from the watchful eye of the capital. Local officials, often appointed through the examination system, could still succumb to corruption, extorting taxes from the peasantry and enriching themselves at the expense of the common people. You might observe villagers struggling under the weight of excessive levies, or forced to perform corvée labor for local dignitaries. A persistent problem throughout imperial Chinese history. The centralized bureaucracy, while a brilliant concept, was not always perfectly executed, leaving room for local tyrants to flourish. And what of the famed Tang poetry, so exquisite and profound? Many of the greatest poets, like Li Bai and Du Fu, lived through periods of immense political instability and personal hardship. You read their verses, filled with longing, sorrow, and often subtle critiques of the imperial court. Du Fu's poems, in particular, often depicted the suffering of the common people, the devastation of war, and the corruption of officials. Their art, while beautiful, often sprang from a wellspring of personal anguish and societal turmoil, reflecting the darker realities that even a golden age could not escape. The Tang dynasty, despite its long and glorious reign, eventually succumbed to internal rebellion and external pressures. The Anlushan rebellion in the mid-8th century was a cataclysmic event, plunging the empire into a devastating civil war that lasted for years and profoundly weakened its power. You witnessed the sheer destruction cities razed, populations decimated, and the central authority crumbling. It was a wound from which the Tang never fully recovered. This rebellion, initially led by a powerful general of Sogdian and Turkish descent, exposed the vulnerabilities of the decentralized military commands and the growing power of regional strongmen. The once mighty imperial army was stretched thin, and the capital, Chang'an, fell to the rebels, leading to unimaginable bloodshed and chaos. The period after the rebellion saw a slow, painful decline, marked by growing power of eunuchs again, provincial warlords, and ultimately, the complete collapse of the dynasty in the early 10th century. You are left with a complex understanding of the Tang. It was undoubtedly an era of incredible cultural achievement, economic prosperity, and imperial might. But it was also a period of political intrigue, brutal power struggles, devastating wars, and social inequalities that challenge the romanticized narrative of a perfect golden age. The Tang teaches you that even at the height of their power, Chinese emperors and empresses could be incredibly cruel, and that the foundations of even the most glorious empires could be built on hidden suffering. You've witnessed the dazzling, yet ultimately tumultuous, Golden Age of the Tang Dynasty, an era of unparalleled cultural brilliance marred by political intrigue, devastating rebellions, and lingering social inequalities. As the Tang Empire slowly crumbled into fragmentation, a new period of disunity, the Five Dynasties and Ten Kingdoms, briefly consumed China. Now, you emerge from that chaos into a new era, one often celebrated for its intellectual and artistic flourishing, the Song Dynasty. But don't let the refined porcelain and landscape paintings fool you. Beneath the surface of scholarly elegance lay a realm of subtle cruelties and pervasive power struggles. You find yourself in the 10th century, as the Song Dynasty, 960–1279 CE, establishes itself, reuniting much of China after decades of fragmentation. Unlike previous dynasties that often rose through sheer military might, the Song placed a strong emphasis on civilian rule and intellectual achievement. You see a profound shift in societal values. Scholars, bureaucrats, and civil officials are elevated above military commanders. This leads to an explosion of intellectual activity, philosophical discourse, and technological innovation. Imagine walking through the bustling Song cities, perhaps Kaifeng or Hangzhou, experiencing a level of sophistication unseen anywhere else in the world at the time. You observe the widespread use of movable type printing, which revolutionizes the dissemination of knowledge. There's the invention of gunpowder, initially for fireworks, but soon for warfare, the magnetic compass becoming a crucial navigational tool, and intricate mechanical clocks. You see a vibrant commercial economy, with paper money in circulation, advanced agricultural techniques, and a burgeoning merchant class. It truly feels like a period of immense progress and intellectual enlightenment. Yet, this emphasis on civilian rule, while laudable, inadvertently created its own set of problems and cruelties. The military, deliberately kept in a subordinate position to prevent ambitious generals from toppling the dynasty, a lesson learned from the Tangs and Lushan rebellion, was often poorly funded and lacked strong leadership. You observe the consequences. The Song, despite its wealth and size, was consistently plagued by threats from powerful nomadic empires on its borders, like the Khitan Liao and the Jurchen Jin. These external pressures led to constant, debilitating wars, draining the imperial coffers and causing immense suffering for border populations. You might see families from the northern frontier, dispossessed and starving, fleeing south as nomadic invaders sweep through their lands. The refined scholars in the capital might debate philosophy, but on the edges of the empire, people were dying by the thousands. It's a stark contrast, the sophisticated inner court versus the brutal reality of a vulnerable borderland. Historians still debate whether the Song's emphasis on civilian rule ultimately weakened their military to a dangerous degree. But the recurring theme of external threats and territorial losses points to a systemic issue. Within the imperial court, power struggles were no less fierce, though perhaps more subtle than the overt battles of previous eras. With the military deliberately curtailed, the arena for ambition shifted to political factionalism and bureaucratic maneuvering. You witness bitter rivalries between different ideological factions, often centered around prominent ministers and their opposing views on policy. For example, the debates between reformers like Wang Anshi and their conservative opponents were not just academic. They involved vicious personal attacks, accusations of corruption, and the systematic purging of rivals from government. Imagine a scene in the Imperial Council. A respected minister proposes sweeping reforms to taxation and land distribution. You see the immediate backlash from entrenched interests, their faces contorted with fury. The debates escalate, not just with words, but with veiled threats, false accusations, and the mobilization of powerful networks within the bureaucracy. Officials who fell out of favor could find themselves banished to remote, disease-ridden provinces, their careers and reputations ruined. It was a quieter form of brutality, but no less effective at crushing dissent and maintaining control. Another unsettling aspect of the Song dynasty was the practice of foot binding, which became widespread during this period, particularly among elite women. You observe the excruciating process. Young girls' feet are tightly bound, deforming them into tiny lotus feet, supposedly a mark of beauty and social status. This agonizing practice, severely limiting a woman's mobility, served as a potent symbol of female subjugation and male control. It's a chilling reminder that even in a highly cultured society, deeply ingrained social norms could inflict profound physical and emotional pain, limiting the lives of countless women. It might not be overt torture, but the quiet, agonizing suffering endured for decades by millions of women is a truly disturbing detail. The Song dynasty also saw the rise of a more rigid form of Neo-Confucianism, while promoting moral self-cultivation and societal harmony. It also emphasized strict social hierarchies and patriarchal values. You see the reinforcement of the notion that women should be subservient to men, and that absolute obedience was expected from subordinates to superiors. This intellectual shift, while seemingly benign, reinforced a system that could be quite oppressive for those at the bottom of the social ladder. Even the famed imperial examinations, while offering a path to social mobility, were intensely competitive and psychologically grueling. You might see aspiring scholars, their faces pale with exhaustion, spending years, even decades, memorizing classics and perfecting their calligraphy, knowing that only a tiny fraction would ever succeed. Failure meant crushing disappointment, often leading to mental breakdown or despair. The pressure was immense, a form of intellectual crucible that could break even the strongest individuals. The eventual fall of the Song dynasty is a tragic, drawn-out affair, weakened by internal divisions and constant warfare with the Jurchen Jin. The southern Song, after the northern capital was lost, ultimately faced the unstoppable force of the Mongol Empire. You witness the overwhelming might of the Mongol cavalry, their relentless sieges, and the devastating destruction they wrought. The Song, for all its intellectual brilliance, could not withstand the sheer military power of the nomadic invaders. The final years of the Southern Song are a testament to desperate resistance against insurmountable odds. You see the imperial court fleeing south, battles fought to the last man, and the utter despair of a civilization facing complete annihilation. The end, in 1279, is particularly grim, with the last Song emperor, a young boy, reportedly drowning himself with his loyal minister rather than be captured by the Mongols. The Song dynasty leaves you with a profound sense of the bittersweet nature of progress. It was an era of incredible intellectual and artistic flourishing, a beacon of civilization. Yet, it was also a period plagued by external threats due to military weakness, internal political machinations that could be just as brutal as open warfare, and social practices that inflicted widespread suffering. The seemingly calm surface of Song society concealed currents of quiet cruelty and pervasive power struggles, reminding you that true tranquility often remains an elusive dream in the relentless march of history. You've just witnessed the refined, yet ultimately vulnerable, Song dynasty succumb to the relentless advance of a force unlike any seen before. The intellectual brilliance and artistic sophistication of the Song proved no match for sheer military might. Now, you find yourself under a completely new kind of rule, one that shattered traditional Chinese notions of governance and identity, the Yuan dynasty, established by the Mongols. Imagine the profound shock. For centuries, China had been ruled by Chinese dynasties, whether they were united or fragmented. The idea of a barbarian nomadic people from the northern steppes conquering the entire realm, from the sophisticated cities of the south to the vast plains of the north, was almost unfathomable. Yet, under the brilliant and brutal leadership of Genghis Khan and his successors, particularly Kublai Khan, this is precisely what happened. You are now in the late 13th century, experiencing the direct aftermath of the Mongol conquest. The initial conquest itself was devastating. You might still see the scars on the land, the ruins of cities that resisted, the echoes of massacres that accompanied the Mongol advance. Their military tactics were unparalleled for their time-swift cavalry charges, devastating siege warfare, and a ruthless willingness to annihilate any who dared to stand in their way. The sheer terror they instilled was a powerful weapon in itself. Once the dust settled, Kublai Khan, the grandson of Genghis Khan, established the Yuan dynasty in 1271, making himself the Emperor of China. This wasn't just a conquest, it was an occupation. You witness a society rigidly divided along ethnic lines. At the top are the Mongols, the ruling elite, holding the highest government positions and enjoying significant privileges. Below them are the Semu, a diverse group of non-Mongol foreigners like Central Asians, Persians, and Europeans who were often employed in administrative and financial roles due to their skills and their lack of loyalty to native Chinese factions. Then come the northern Chinese, who had been under Mongol rule for longer. And at the very bottom, considered the least trustworthy and most heavily taxed, are the southern Chinese, the former subjects of the Song dynasty. This racial hierarchy profoundly impacted daily life. You might observe a Mongol official treating a Chinese scholar with disdain, or a Semu merchant enjoying preferential treatment over a native Chinese one. It's a constant, visible reminder that you are living in an occupied territory, under the rule of outsiders who fundamentally distrust the majority of the population. The traditional Confucian literati, who had formed the backbone of Chinese bureaucracy for centuries, found themselves marginalized. Their examination system often suspended or downgraded, and their values often disdained by the rougher, more pragmatic Mongols. The Mongols, as nomadic conquerors, brought a different administrative philosophy. While they adopted many Chinese institutions, their primary focus was on extracting wealth to fund their vast empire and their lavish lifestyles. You witness the imposition of heavy taxes and levies, often collected with brutal efficiency. The common people, especially the southern Chinese, bore the brunt of this economic exploitation. You might see villages struggling to meet their quotas, facing severe penalties if they fell short. And what about the justice system? It was often arbitrary and harsh, particularly for the Chinese. While the Mongols introduced some advancements in legal codification, the enforcement could be brutal. You might hear of instances where a Mongol or Semu official could treat a Chinese person with impunity, knowing that their status offered protection. It's a society where justice is not equal, and where the rule of law is often bent to favor the conquerors. Perhaps one of the most disturbing aspects was the fear of rebellion. The Mongols, acutely aware that they were a small minority ruling over a vast, potentially resentful Chinese population, implemented strict controls. You might see restrictions on weapon ownership, or even prohibitions on large gatherings. Curfews were common. The ubiquitous presence of Mongol garrisons and the constant surveillance by various officials created an atmosphere of pervasive distrust and quiet resentment. Every whisper of dissent, every hint of organized opposition, was met with swift and often brutal suppression. Despite the oppression, the Yuan dynasty also facilitated unprecedented cultural exchange due to its position as part of a vast Eurasian empire. You might encounter Venetian merchants like Marco Polo, amazed by the sheer scale and sophistication of Chinese cities. New technologies and ideas flowed both in and out of China. Yet, even this exchange was often one-sided, benefiting the Mongol rulers more than the common Chinese populace, who continued to suffer under the heavy yoke of foreign rule. The Mongols, for all their military prowess, were not accustomed to governing such a complex, agricultural society as China. Their attempts to implement new policies, often driven by their nomadic traditions rather than Chinese precedents, frequently led to economic mismanagement and widespread discontent. You might see their efforts to introduce new forms of currency causing inflation, or their reliance on foreign advisors leading to corruption and inefficiency. The Yuan emperors themselves, though powerful, were often caught between their Mongol heritage and the demands of ruling a settled agricultural empire. Some, like Kublai Khan, tried to adopt Chinese customs and integrate, but many of their successors struggled, often indulging in excessive luxury and neglecting governance. You witness a growing instability within the imperial court itself, with frequent changes of emperors, often through assassinations or internal coups. As the dynasty aged, the seeds of its downfall, sown during the conquest, began to sprout. The heavy taxation, the widespread famines exacerbated by neglected infrastructure like the Yellow River's shifting course, and the deeply ingrained racial discrimination fueled a simmering discontent. You feel the tension building, the quiet anger transforming into open defiance. Historians still debate whether the Yuan dynasty's downfall was primarily due to internal mismanagement or the inherent difficulty of foreign rule over such a complex civilization. But the result was widespread rebellion. The Red Turban Rebellion and other uprisings began to spread like wildfire across the land. You see the Chinese people, finally pushed to their breaking point, rising up against their foreign overlords. The Mongol military, once invincible, found itself stretched thin and facing a unified, desperate Chinese populace. The battles are fierce and bloody, a brutal fight for liberation. The Yuan dynasty, after less than a century, ultimately collapsed, driven out by a peasant rebel leader who would go on to found the next great Chinese dynasty. You are left with a powerful image of what happens when cultural traditions clash, and when an elite minority attempts to rule a vast population through fear and discrimination. The Yuan serves as a stark reminder that even the most powerful foreign conquerors can only maintain their grip for so long before the resentment of the ruled boils over. The legacy of their rule is a complex tapestry of both enforced cultural exchange and deep-seated animosity. You've just witnessed the unprecedented foreign rule of the Yuan dynasty, a period where nomadic conquerors from the steppes imposed a rigid hierarchy and often brutal administration on China. The resentment simmered for decades, eventually boiling over into widespread rebellions that finally drove the Mongols out. Now, you stand at the dawn of a truly indigenous Chinese dynasty, one that would assert its authority with a potent mix of grandeur, paranoia, and chilling brutality, the Ming dynasty. Imagine the immense relief and fervent patriotism that swept across China as a peasant rebel leader, Zhu Yuanzhang, finally expelled the Mongol remnants and declared himself Emperor Hongwu, establishing the Ming dynasty in 1368. This wasn't just a new dynasty. It was a defiant reassertion of Chinese identity and sovereignty after a century of foreign domination. You feel the palpable sense of renewal, a desire to restore past glories and purge all foreign influences. Emperor Hongwu, a man who rose from abject poverty to become the most powerful ruler in China, was deeply suspicious of the scholarly elite and haunted by the fear of betrayal. Having experienced the hardships of peasant life and the brutal realities of civil war, he was determined to forge an empire that was both strong and secure from internal threats. This determination, however, manifested in profoundly disturbing ways. You witness the initial years of his reign, characterized by a ruthless purge of anyone he perceived as a threat. His paranoia was legendary. Generals who had fought alongside him, officials who seemed too ambitious, even old friends, all could fall victim to his suspicion. He created a vast and terrifying secret police apparatus, including the infamous Jin Yi Wei embroidered uniform guard, who operated with unchecked authority, spying on officials and commoners alike. You might see innocent individuals suddenly arrested in the dead of night, dragged away to face torture and execution without trial, based on little more than a whisper of disloyalty. The very air seems to hum with unspoken fear. The scale of these purges was staggering. Thousands upon thousands of officials, scholars, and their entire families were implicated in real or imagined conspiracies, leading to mass executions. Remember, the burning of the books under Qin Shi Huang Emperor Hongwu's purges were a human bonfire, aimed at eradicating any potential source of dissent. Historians still debate whether these purges were a necessary consolidation of power or a manifestation of extreme paranoia. But the chilling efficiency of his secret police and the sheer number of victims paint a grim picture of imperial terror. The Ming legal system, while outwardly promoting justice, was also known for its particularly gruesome forms of punishment. For serious crimes, or even perceived disloyalty, you might witness death by 1,000 cuts lingqi, a slow and agonizing dismemberment. Other common punishments included flaying, boiling alive, or prolonged imprisonment with torture. These were not quick deaths. They were designed to instill maximum terror and serve as public spectacles to deter any thoughts of rebellion. Imagine the horror of seeing such a punishment, even from a distance. The screams echoing through the marketplace. A stark reminder of the emperor's absolute power over life and death. It's a level of visceral brutality that makes the Han dynasty's court intrigues seem almost polite. Despite this terror, the Ming dynasty was also an era of immense grandeur and significant achievements. You see the construction of the Forbidden City in Beijing, a sprawling imperial palace complex that still stands as a monumental symbol of imperial power. Its scale is breathtaking, its walls impenetrable, designed to project an image of invincibility and divine authority. Thousands of laborers, often under duress, toiled for years to create this architectural marvel, a testament to the wealth and centralized control of the Ming emperors. The Ming also saw the flourishing of art and culture, particularly porcelain production, known for its distinctive blue and white patterns. You might observe bustling workshops, skilled artisans meticulously crafting these beautiful wares that would be prized around the world. Trade flourished, both domestically and, for a period, internationally, particularly through the remarkable voyages of Admiral Zheng He. You could imagine his massive treasure ships, far larger than anything built in Europe at the time, sailing to distant lands like Africa and the Middle East, showcasing China's power and wealth. However, the Ming's internal focus and paranoia eventually led to a policy of maritime prohibitions, hygiene, severely restricting overseas trade and isolating China from the rest of the world. You see the once thriving coastal communities suffer, their livelihoods curtailed, and the vibrant exchange of ideas diminished. This inward turn, driven by a fear of foreign influence and a desire for self-sufficiency, ultimately left China vulnerable to later external pressures. The imperial examination system was further refined and became the primary pathway to officialdom, but it was also incredibly rigid and stifling. You see scholars spending their entire lives memorizing classical texts, often to the exclusion of practical knowledge. The competition was fierce, and corruption, though officially condemned, often permeated the system. The intellectual vibrancy of the Song era slowly gave way to a more conservative and formalized academic culture. As the dynasty progressed, the influence of eunuchs, a familiar problem from the Han, resurfaced with terrifying force. Ming eunuchs, particularly under emperors who became detached from governance, amassed immense power, controlling vast networks of spies and often engaging in widespread corruption. You witness them wielding power behind the scenes, manipulating court decisions, and extracting vast sums of wealth from the populace. The Eastern Depot and Western Depot, powerful eunuch-controlled secret police agencies, instilled fear throughout the bureaucracy, often acting as extensions of the emperor's or the eunuch's own arbitrary will. The later Ming emperors, often weak or disinterested in governance, allowed these eunuchs to become virtually omnipotent, leading to widespread mismanagement and a growing disconnect between the imperial court and the suffering of the common people. The empire, for all its imposing majesty, was slowly decaying from within, consumed by internal power struggles and corruption. The final decades of the Ming dynasty were marked by escalating internal rebellions, driven by famine, heavy taxation, and widespread corruption. You see the desperation of the peasants, rising up against a seemingly indifferent imperial court. External threats also re-emerged, particularly the rising power of the Manchus in the northeast. The Ming, weakened and fractured, could not withstand these combined pressures. The end of the Ming, in 1644, is a dramatic and tragic affair. Beijing falls to a peasant rebel army, and the last Ming emperor, disillusioned and despairing, hangs himself in the imperial garden. Soon after, the Manchu armies, initially invited in to help suppress the rebels, seize the opportunity to conquer China themselves, establishing the final imperial dynasty. The Ming dynasty leaves you with a complex legacy. It was an era of monumental architectural achievement, cultural brilliance, and a fierce reassertion of Chinese identity. Yet, it was also a period of profound paranoia, horrifying state-sanctioned cruelty, debilitating political purges, and the dangerous concentration of power in the hands of a few, often unstable, individuals. The majesty of the Forbidden City stands as a testament to its power. But the echoes of fear and the shadows of its brutal punishments are an equally enduring part of its story. You've just navigated the magnificent, yet terrifying world of the Ming Dynasty, an era of impressive architectural feats and cultural reassertion, but also chilling paranoia and state-sanctioned brutality that rivaled anything seen before. The Ming's eventual collapse, brought on by internal strife and the formidable rise of the Manchus, sets the stage for the final imperial chapter of China. Now, you stand at the twilight of dynastic rule, under the Qing dynasty, a period of both splendor and decline, grappling with internal strife and external pressures that leave a lasting, uneasy legacy. Imagine the dramatic transition. The Manchus, a semi-nomadic people from Northeast Asia, were invited by a Ming general to help quell a massive peasant rebellion, only to seize the opportunity and conquer China themselves. In 1644, they established the Qing dynasty, marking another period of foreign rule, but one fundamentally different from the Mongol Yuan. The Qing, unlike the Mongols, actively sought to integrate into Chinese culture, adopting Confucianism and maintaining many existing administrative structures. You witness the initial efforts of the early Qing emperors, like Kangxi and Qianlong, to legitimize their rule, portraying themselves as benevolent Confucian monarchs. True sons of heaven. These early Qing emperors presided over a period of immense prosperity and territorial expansion, arguably the largest and most populous empire in human history at the time. You see the vastness of their dominion, stretching across Tibet, Mongolia, and parts of Central Asia. The economy thrives, the population swells, and cultural achievements, particularly in art and literature, continue to flourish. You might observe the exquisite craftsmanship of Qing porcelain, the intricate beauty of their imperial gardens, and the vibrant intellectual life of scholars. It feels like a return to stability and even a new golden age, one that blends Manchu martial vigor with Chinese administrative sophistication. However, beneath this veneer of imperial grandeur, a persistent tension lingers. You notice the subtle ways in which Manchu rule is imposed. While they adopted Chinese customs, they also maintained a distinct identity. Manchu bannermen, the elite military units, were stationed across the empire, forming a ruling caste. Chinese men were compelled to adopt the Manchu hairstyle, the queue, a shaved forehead with a long braided pigtail, a potent symbol of submission to Manchu rule. Refusal to adopt it could result in execution. You might see a Chinese man reluctantly shaving his forehead, a silent testament to the daily reminder of who was truly in charge. This seemingly minor detail was a constant, irritating imposition, a daily sign of the conquered status. The Qing also saw the continued, and often intensified, use of a terrifying tool of imperial control, literary inquisitions. These were not just purges of people, but of thoughts. Emperors, particularly Qianlong, obsessed with maintaining orthodox Confucian thought and stamping out any perceived anti-Manchu sentiment, launched systematic campaigns to censor, revise, and destroy books. Scholars could be brutally punished, even executed, for lines in their writings that were deemed critical of the Qing, or even for seemingly innocuous phrases that could be interpreted as disloyal. You hear whispers of fear among the literati, as they painstakingly edited their works, or even burned their own manuscripts, to avoid attracting the emperor's wrath. It's a chilling suppression of intellectual freedom, where words could literally lead to your demise. Beyond the literary purges, the Qing retained, and in some cases, refined, the brutal punishments of previous dynasties. Public floggings were common, and for serious offenses, the most gruesome methods. like beheading and dismemberment, were still employed to instill fear and maintain order. The power of the local magistrate was immense, and justice could often be swift and unforgiving. As the dynasty moved into its later centuries, its initial vigor began to wane, and the darker realities of its rule became more pronounced. The vast population growth, while initially a sign of prosperity, eventually strained resources, leading to widespread poverty and landlessness for millions of peasants. You see rural areas struggling, outbreaks of famine becoming more frequent, and social unrest simmering just below the surface. Internal rebellions, fueled by poverty, corruption, and lingering anti-Manchu sentiment, became increasingly common and devastating. The White Lotus Rebellion and later the enormous Taiping Rebellion are prime examples. The Taiping Rebellion, in particular, was a cataclysm of unimaginable scale, lasting for 14 years and costing an estimated 20 to 30 million lives, more than any war in Europe until the 20th century. You witnessed the sheer brutality of this civil war, cities besieged and destroyed. Vast swaths of the countryside laid waste, and the empire bleeding itself dry to suppress its own people. This was not just a political challenge, it was a societal implosion. And then, there's the growing pressure from the outside world. The Qing dynasty, despite its immense power, clung to a worldview that saw China as the central kingdom, superior to all others. This led to a profound inability or unwillingness to adapt to the rising power of Western nations. You see the arrival of European powers, demanding trade concessions, pushing opium into Chinese markets, and eventually resorting to military force. The Opium Wars are a particularly humiliating chapter, where the mighty Qing Empire is defeated by technologically superior British forces, leading to forced treaties, territorial concessions, and a profound sense of national humiliation. You witness the growing frustration and anger among the Chinese people, as their once invincible empire is humiliated and exploited by foreign powers. The emperor, once considered the son of heaven, appears increasingly powerless. The final decades of the Qing are a slow, painful decline, marked by a series of internal rebellions, foreign encroachments, and increasingly desperate, often futile, attempts at reform. The Qing dynasty, for all its long history and impressive early achievements, ultimately ended not with a bang, but a whimper. The empire, riddled with corruption, unable to adapt to a changing world, and exhausted by internal strife, finally collapsed in 1912, bringing an end to over 2 millennia of imperial rule in China. You are left with the indelible image of a vast, ancient empire struggling to survive in a world that had fundamentally changed, clinging to traditions and power structures that were no longer sustainable. The queue, once a symbol of submission, became a symbol of a bygone era,